Lucas Grant sat at the edge of his sleek, impossibly white leather sofa, his eyes scanning the view from the floor-to-ceiling windows of his penthouse. The city of Chicago sprawled beneath him like a well-organized machine, streets pulsing with movement, yet he remained untouched, a solitary figure in the heart of it all. The sunrise, a soft wash of peach and gold, bathed the room in an ethereal glow that only seemed to make the polished marble floors shine brighter, the glass walls colder. Everything about his life, his world, was designed for perfection, precision, order. But today none of it felt comforting. The morning light, which usually soothed him, only amplified the quiet ache inside him. He hadn't felt truly comfortable in this apartment for years, not since the day she left. His phone buzzed, interrupting his thoughts. He glanced at it, dismissing the message as another work notification. He'd built a multi-million-dollar tech empire from the ground up, and there was always something that needed his attention. But as his thumb hovered over the screen, something caught his eye. The sender's name, Ava Mitchell. Avenue. He hadn't heard from her in over 5 years. She was his ex-wife, the one person who had ever truly mattered to him, and the one person he had pushed away. Their marriage had ended with a bitter finality, a stark contrast to the love they had once shared. She had been the wild spark to his rigid, controlled world, the only person who ever made him feel something beyond ambition and success. Yet here he was, a billionaire who had everything, and yet nothing, while she had become a ghost in his memory. He hesitated, his finger still lingering on the message. The fear of what it might say gripped him for a moment. What did she want now? It had been 5 years, and they hadn't spoken a word to each other since the divorce papers were signed. Was she asking for money again? A part of him, the one that still felt betrayed by her departure, hoped it was nothing more than that. With a sharp breath, he tapped the message open. Lucas, we need to talk. There's something I should have told you all those years ago. Please meet me. His heart skipped a beat. He couldn't remember the last time a simple message had left him this unsettled. A cold shiver ran down his spine, and he immediately felt a heaviness settle over his chest. It wasn't just a request for money or assistance, it was a plea from the woman who had once been his world. He leaned back against the cushions, his mind spinning. Ava had always been unpredictable, full of fire and passion. But after the divorce, there had been nothing. Not even a trace of the woman who had once laughed with him under the stars, or cried with him after their failures. They had parted ways, both of them wounded, and he had buried that chapter of his life deep in his past. What could she possibly want after all this time? And what could she possibly say that would change anything? His phone buzzed again, dragging him out of his reverie. He glanced at the new message, this time from his assistant. The presentation for the new tech acquisition is scheduled for 11 a.m. today. We're expecting an answer from the board after the meeting. Lucas felt the familiar pull of his professional world. There was no time for distractions. There were deals to be made, profits to be gained. He had spent so many years building his empire, he had almost forgotten what it was like to have personal connections, to experience life beyond the spreadsheets and boardrooms. This was the life he had chosen. This was the life that had kept him from feeling anything too deeply. But there it was again. Ava's message. He set the phone down, staring at the glowing screen, his fingers tapping restlessly on the arm of the couch. Get a grip, he muttered to himself, though his voice sounded foreign, almost shaky. He was Lucas Grant, CEO of Grant Enterprises, a man who thrived on control, who built his world with precision. He wasn't someone who let past mistakes or emotions dictate his present. Still, as he reached for his phone once more, a thought nagged at him. What if it wasn't about the past? What if it was about something else entirely? A part of him wanted to dismiss it. He had spent so much time curating this life, focusing on his career, accumulating wealth, power, and influence. But no amount of success had ever quieted the ache that lingered in the corners of his heart. No amount of luxury had filled the hole she left behind. With a heavy sigh, he typed a quick response. "What do you want, Ava?" As soon as he hit send, regret flashed through him. He should have been more polite, more considerate. But after all these years, he wasn't sure how to be anything else. He wasn't even sure if he still knew her, if he could even recognize the woman he once promised to love forever. His phone buzzed once more, the sound cutting through the silence of his penthouse. "I'll explain everything when we meet." A chill ran down his spine. Something about that message unsettled him in a way he couldn't explain. It was a simple reply, yet it carried the weight of something unspoken. A secret. As Lucas stared out at the sprawling city, a quiet, unsettling thought gnawed at him. What if this message changes everything? For the first time in years, Lucas wasn't sure if he was ready to face the truth about his past. The very thing he had spent so long trying to outrun was suddenly standing right in front of him, demanding his attention. And for the first time in a long time, Lucas wondered if his carefully crafted world was about to come undone. Lucas stood in his penthouse, the cool morning air wrapping around him as he stared at his phone. His hands felt oddly clammy as he reread Ava's message. "I'll explain everything when we meet." The message was simple, but there was a weight to it, something deeper that gnawed at him like a puzzle piece he couldn't quite place. For the past 5 years, he had built his life on the foundation of control, work, meetings, the deal-making grind. But now, with Ava's words hanging in the air like a delicate thread, everything he had worked so hard to keep stable felt fragile. His mind raced with possibilities, but they all led back to one painful conclusion. There was something about the past he hadn't fully understood, something that had been left unfinished, left unspoken between them, and he wasn't sure if he was ready to face it. Before he could think too much about it, his assistant, Emily, sent another reminder about the morning's board meeting. Lucas had always been able to compartmentalize his life. Work was work. Personal matters were personal. But today, those lines blurred in ways he couldn't ignore. The message from Ava hung over him like a dark cloud, urging him to address the past, to confront the feelings he had buried for so long. He quickly texted back, "Where and when?" It was an automatic response, the kind of impersonal reply he would have sent anyone in a business context. But this wasn't business. He knew it, and deep down, Ava knew it too. The phone buzzed in his hand again. "The cafe on Lincoln Avenue, 2 p.m. Please come." Her message was short, but the finality in those 2 words, "please come," struck him harder than he expected. Lucas glanced at the clock, the minutes ticking away as he made the decision. 2 p.m. He would go, but part of him, the part that hated surprises, hated unknowns, wanted to walk away. Yet he couldn't. He hadn't been able to shake her from his thoughts all morning. He grabbed his jacket and left his penthouse, locking the door behind him. The elevator ride down to the garage was quiet, his reflection staring back at him in the polished silver doors. He wasn't a man who took risks. He had built his empire by making calculated decisions, by maintaining control over every aspect of his life. But in this moment, as he drove through the streets of Chicago toward a meeting with Ava, the man he had become felt like a stranger to him. The cafe on Lincoln Avenue was small, cozy, and unassuming, tucked between high-end boutiques and art galleries. It was the kind of place that felt as if it had been here for decades, a quiet corner where the hustle of the city faded into a soft hum. Lucas arrived a few minutes early, as was his habit. He had always prided himself on punctuality, on being in control of his schedule. But as he stepped out of the car and approached the cafe, his hands tightened around the keys in his pocket, the weight of the past and present colliding inside him. When he entered, the scent of fresh coffee and baked pastries greeted him, and the soft murmur of voices filled the air. He scanned the room, and there she was, sitting at a small table in the back, facing the door. Her auburn hair fell in soft waves around her shoulders, a little longer than the last time he had seen her. She wore a simple black dress, elegant in its simplicity, and the moment their eyes met, a wave of emotion hit him like a tidal wave. Ava had always had that effect on him. She hadn't changed much in appearance. Her beauty was timeless, in the way that real beauty often was, more about the quiet strength of a person than about anything superficial. But there was a weariness in her eyes, a depth that had been absent when they were married. She looked more serious, more thoughtful, but there was something vulnerable in the way she sat, her hands clasped tightly on the table, as if bracing for something. "Lucas," she said softly, standing as he approached, her voice a familiar melody that stirred something deep within him. "Ava," he replied, his voice hoarse, and for a moment neither of them moved. The years that had passed between them felt like a chasm, but it was a chasm they both knew they couldn't ignore. He sat down across from her, the table small enough that their knees brushed, the intimacy of it unexpected. The touch sent a jolt through him, but he quickly masked it with a deep breath. "Why did you reach out?" Lucas asked, the question tumbling out before he could think better of it. The bluntness was a defense mechanism, a way to shield himself from the emotions he wasn't ready to confront. Ava's gaze flickered to the side before meeting his again, a moment of hesitation passing between them. "There's something I should have told you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, as if the very words were heavy. Lucas felt a knot form in his chest, tightening with every passing second. He didn't want to be here, didn't want to face whatever secret she was about to reveal. But a deeper part of him, the part he rarely acknowledged, was already bracing itself for the truth. "I don't know if I can go back to that time, Ava," he said, his voice strained. "It's been 5 years. We've both moved on." Ava's eyes softened, and she shook her head. "That's just it, Lucas. I don't think either of us really moved on." Her words hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. There was a shift between them, a moment where the walls they had both built around themselves seemed to crack. For the first time, Lucas saw her not as the woman who had left him, but as the woman who had once shared everything with him, and the longing that had always simmered beneath the surface flared up, hot and consuming. "What do you mean?" Lucas asked, leaning forward slightly, his curiosity piqued despite himself. Ava took a deep breath, her hands shaking slightly as she reached for the coffee in front of her. "There's a reason why I left, Lucas. There's a reason why I kept my distance all these years, and it has everything to do with you, us, and something that I've kept hidden." The room felt suddenly smaller, the air thicker. He leaned back, his chest tight as he tried to process her words. "What are you saying?" Ava didn't answer right away. Instead, she reached into her bag and pulled out an envelope. The beige paper was plain, unremarkable, but Lucas couldn't help but notice the way her fingers trembled as she set it down on the table between them. Inside, Lucas knew, was the secret that would change everything. The envelope sat between them, its plain beige surface a stark contrast to the weight of the moment. Lucas couldn't take his eyes off of it. Ava's fingers trembled as she folded her hands around the envelope, clearly unsure of how to proceed, but determined to speak the words she had held back for years. "Do you remember when we talked about starting a family?" Ava's voice broke through the silence, soft and uncertain. She didn't wait for him to answer, her gaze instead drifting out the window, as if the city outside could somehow offer her the courage she needed. Lucas wasn't sure what he had expected. Perhaps for Ava to tell him she'd been sick, or that she regretted the divorce, or that she was in trouble and needed his help. But this was something else entirely. His stomach tightened, and an uncomfortable silence stretched between them. He couldn't bring himself to respond, couldn't bring himself to ask the questions that were clawing at the edges of his mind. Ava took a deep breath before she continued. "We tried, Lucas, but things were never as easy as we thought they would be. You were so consumed by your career, by building your empire, and I thought I could handle it, but I couldn't, not after I found out." Lucas's heart skipped a beat. Found out? The words felt like a punch to the gut. For a moment he couldn't breathe, the space between them suddenly feeling impossibly vast. He opened his mouth to say something, but the words wouldn't come. Ava met his gaze again, her eyes filled with a quiet sadness. "I was pregnant, Lucas. I was pregnant, and I never told you." The world seemed to tilt on its axis, and for a long moment, Lucas couldn't make sense of anything. His mind raced back to the years they had spent together, back to when they were happy, when the future had seemed so full of possibility. They had talked about children, dreamed of a family. He had wanted it. She had wanted it. But somewhere along the way, it all slipped through their fingers. "I didn't know," Lucas whispered, the weight of her words settling like an anchor in his chest. His voice was thick, and for the first time in years, he felt the cracks in his carefully constructed armor. His life, his world of power and control, was suddenly shattered by something so simple, so human, that he didn't know how to respond. Ava's expression softened, her lips trembling as she reached for the envelope. She opened it carefully, pulling out a piece of paper. "I never wanted this to happen," she continued, her voice thick with emotion. "But after everything, I felt like I had to keep it from you. I thought you'd never accept it, never accept me, and I couldn't bear the thought of losing you completely." Lucas stared at the paper she handed him, his hands unsteady as he unfolded it. It was a birth certificate, one that he didn't recognize, one that had nothing to do with the life he thought he had known. "Ava." His voice trailed off as he looked at the name on the document. It wasn't just any birth certificate. It was for their child, his child. "Her name is Lily," Ava said, her voice barely above a whisper. "She's 6 now. I've kept her a secret all this time because I didn't know what to do. But now I have to tell you. She's yours, Lucas. She's our daughter." The room felt like it was closing in on him. The air was thick with the weight of the revelation, and Lucas's world tilted on its axis once again. He had known Ava's heart, had known her love. But this was something entirely different. This was a child, his child, who had lived her life without him. And all of those years, those lost years, suddenly seemed like a cruel joke. "I didn't want to lose her, Lucas," Ava whispered, the tears in her eyes reflecting the pain she had been carrying for years. "But I was scared. I was scared that you'd never forgive me, and I couldn't take the risk of losing you both." Lucas was frozen. His mind was flooded with 1,000 thoughts, none of them making sense. How could this be real? How could she have kept this from him? And yet, there was no denying the truth staring him in the face. This child, Lily, his daughter, had been born during the very time that he had been climbing the corporate ladder, expanding his empire, fighting for success and control. And in the process, he had lost everything that had truly mattered. "I don't understand," Lucas finally managed, his voice hoarse. "Why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you come to me?" Ava closed her eyes, her shoulders slumping as if the weight of the years was finally catching up with her. "I thought I was protecting you, Lucas. You were already so consumed by your work, by your company. I didn't want to add to your burden. I thought it would be easier to raise her on my own. I thought I could do it. But I couldn't." She shook her head slowly, as if trying to convince herself of something she hadn't believed in years. I thought if I could just keep it hidden, if I could just forget. But I can't forget anymore. I can't live like this, and I can't raise her alone. She deserves to know her father." Lucas's heart beat so loudly in his chest he could barely hear her words, but the desperation in her voice cut through him, reaching into the core of everything he had ever thought he understood. He had always been in control of his world, his wealth, his success, his choices. But this was something he couldn't control. His eyes never left the birth certificate in his hand, his fingers numb from the shock. He had never felt more unmoored, more lost. His life had always been about building something, a future, a legacy. But this was his legacy, in the form of a child he didn't even know. For the first time in his life, Lucas Grant realized that the wealth he had amassed, the empire he had built, meant nothing in the face of this new reality. His world had been turned upside down by a woman he had once loved, and a child who had been his all along. The question now wasn't about his next business deal. It was about something deeper, something far more profound. "I have to meet her," he said quietly, the words coming out before he even knew he had decided. The decision wasn't rational. It wasn't even logical, but it was the only thing he could think to do. Ava nodded, the relief in her eyes barely visible beneath the heavy burden of her confession. "I'll take you to her. She's at my place. I just needed you to know the truth first." Lucas stood up, the weight of the moment still sinking in. There were so many things he needed to say, so many questions he wanted to ask, but the only thing he could focus on was one simple, undeniable truth. He had a daughter, and no matter how much he had achieved in his life, no matter how many deals he had closed or buildings he had acquired, this moment, this child, was the most important thing that had ever happened to him. Lucas's hands gripped the steering wheel with a white-knuckled intensity, his mind racing faster than the sleek black car that sped through the streets of Chicago. Ava sat beside him, her face pale in the dim light of the evening, the glow of streetlights flickering as they passed. The air in the car was thick with unspoken words, each of them heavier than the last. He still couldn't believe it. A child, their child, 6 years old, and he had missed everything. The birthdays, the milestones, the moments that had shaped the person she was. Ava had built a life without him, and now he was on his way to meet this little girl, his daughter, and he had no idea what to expect. Do you think she'll like me?" Lucas asked, the question slipping out before he could stop it. His voice, always so controlled in business meetings, now felt unsteady, fragile. The vulnerability surprised him, and he quickly ran a hand through his hair, frustrated by the tremor he couldn't hide. Ava glanced at him, her eyes softening, a hint of something like sympathy, or was it pity, crossing her face. "She's just a little girl, Lucas. She doesn't need you to be perfect. She just needs you to be there." Lucas nodded, though the words didn't offer him much reassurance. He wasn't used to being just there. He was used to being in control, used to being the man who commanded every room he entered, every deal he closed. But this wasn't a boardroom or a negotiation table. This was his daughter, a child he didn't even know, and yet she was already the most important thing in his life. They arrived at Ava's apartment complex, a quiet, upscale building nestled in the heart of the city's cultural district. The contrast between the sleek, modern high-rises where Lucas lived and this more intimate, artsy neighborhood only added to the sense of displacement he felt. Ava had carved out a life here, on her own terms, without him, and now she was about to introduce him to the child they had created together. As they stepped out of the car, the weight of the moment pressed down on him. Ava led the way, her steps purposeful yet careful, as though each one was measured, each one a reminder of how much time had passed. When they reached her door, Ava hesitated, her hand hovering over the doorknob. "She doesn't know you're coming. I didn't know how to prepare her, or if I even should." Lucas's heart raced at the thought. What if she doesn't like me? What if I'm not enough? But he didn't say it out loud. Instead, he took a deep breath, steadying himself for what was to come. "You're her father, Lucas," Ava said quietly, as though reading his thoughts. "She already has a father. She just doesn't know it yet." With that, she opened the door. The apartment was cozy, filled with the warmth of soft lighting and family photos on the walls. A few toys were scattered around the living room, evidence of a life that had flourished in his absence. It was a stark contrast to his own sterile, minimalist apartment, where everything was designed to be perfect but lacked the soul of a real home. Ava walked into the living room, her eyes scanning the space, and then called out softly, "Lily, sweetie? Can you come here for a minute?" Lucas's breath caught in his throat as the little girl appeared from around the corner, her small figure framed by the doorway. She had brown hair, the same deep brown as Ava's, and her eyes were wide, a soft curiosity in them as she regarded the strangers standing in her home. She was wearing a pink pajama set, and her bare feet padded across the hardwood floor as she approached. Ava bent down to her level, her voice tender. "Lily, I want you to meet someone. This is Lucas." The little girl's gaze flickered between Ava and Lucas, her expression unreadable. There was a moment of silence, and Lucas felt his chest tighten. What if she rejected him? What if she didn't want anything to do with him? But then, to his surprise, Lily stepped forward and held out her hand. "Hi, Lucas," she said, her voice soft but steady, the innocence in her words disarming him completely. It was as though the floodgates of his emotions had been opened. He swallowed hard, his throat thick with the weight of everything he hadn't known, everything he had missed. Without thinking, he crouched down, meeting her at eye level, and gently took her hand. "Hi, Lily," he said, his voice almost breaking. "I'm your daddy." The words felt foreign to him, like they didn't quite belong. But in that moment, as the little girl's tiny hand curled around his, he knew they were true. The weight of responsibility, of fatherhood, hit him like a wave, and for the first time in years, he felt alive. Not with the rush of a successful deal or the thrill of closing a multi-million-dollar contract, but with the raw, overwhelming feeling of connection. Lily blinked up at him, her eyes bright with something he couldn't quite place. "You're my daddy?" she asked, her voice curious, as if she was trying to figure out the puzzle that was unfolding in front of her. "Yes," he said, his heart swelling. "I'm your daddy, and I'm sorry I haven't been here before." The little girl tilted her head, then smiled a small, shy smile. "That's okay. I'm glad you're here now." Ava watched them, her expression unreadable, but Lucas caught the flash of something in her eyes. Hope, maybe, or relief. It was clear that this moment, this fragile first step, was just as monumental for her as it was for him. She had made the decision to bring him into their daughter's life, and now it was up to him to prove he was worthy of that trust. "Would you like to play with me?" Lily asked, her voice still quiet but warm. Lucas looked at Ava, who gave him an encouraging nod. For a moment he hesitated. He didn't know how to be a father, not really. but he couldn't let her down. Not again. "I'd love to," he said, his voice steadying. As he followed Lily over to the couch where she had spread out a collection of stuffed animals, something shifted inside him. There, in that small, intimate apartment, in the presence of his daughter, Lucas felt the world he had built, the empire, the wealth, the accolades, fall away. In that moment it was clear. It wasn't the power or the success that would define his life. It was the love, the connection, the opportunity to be the father he had never known he could be. And somehow, in the quiet chaos of their living room, surrounded by toys and laughter, Lucas Grant began to realize that this new life, was worth far more than all the wealth in the world. The hours following his first meeting with Lily were a blur, a whirlwind of emotion that left Lucas feeling both elated and raw in ways he hadn't anticipated. Ava had stayed mostly quiet as they sat on the couch, watching Lily play with her toys, carefully introducing him to the stuffed animals and plastic figurines as if they were old friends. He had watched, fascinated, as Lily's small hands moved confidently, picking up each figure and giving it a voice, creating worlds within worlds. For the first time in what felt like forever, Lucas found himself losing track of time. He wasn't thinking about meetings or deadlines or quarterly reports. For the first time in years, the only thing that mattered was this little girl who was quietly becoming the center of his universe. But as the evening wore on, the weight of reality began to settle in. Ava had already started to clean up the toys, and Lucas was still perched on the edge of the couch, unable to shake the feeling that he was teetering on the edge of something monumental, something he couldn't fully grasp. He glanced over at Ava, who was now folding a blanket. Her movements were slow, almost deliberate, as if she were giving herself space to think. The silence between them was comfortable but heavy, the air thick with things unsaid. Lucas opened his mouth, then closed it. He had so many questions, so much to ask, but he wasn't sure where to begin. Part of him didn't even know if he had the right to ask them. After all, it was his absence that had caused all of this, his absence that had allowed Ava to carry this secret for years. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he spoke, his voice low. "Ava, why didn't you tell me sooner? Why did you wait so long?" Ava didn't look at him immediately. She kept folding the blanket, a practiced calm in her movements that betrayed nothing. For a long time, the only sound in the room was the rustle of fabric as she worked. "I thought I was protecting you," she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. She finally met his gaze, her eyes soft but full of years of pain. "I thought if I kept Lily to myself, I was doing what was best for all of us. You were so consumed by your company, Lucas. I didn't want to interfere with that. I didn't think you'd understand. And I couldn't take the risk of you not being there. For either of us." Her words hung in the air, and Lucas's heart twisted. He wanted to argue, to insist that if she had only told him sooner, things might have been different. But deep down, he knew she had made the choice she thought was best, just as he had always made decisions based on what he thought was best for his business, for his future. "I wasn't there for you," Lucas said, the weight of the words settling heavily in his chest. "I wasn't there for either of you. I thought I was doing the right thing, but now I see it wasn't enough. I've missed so much." Ava's expression softened, her lips trembling for just a moment before she spoke again. "I know, Lucas. I know you did the best you could, but your best wasn't enough for us, and I couldn't wait forever for you to realize that. I had to move on, for her sake." The pain in her words was like a punch to his gut. He had thought he understood the cost of his ambition, the sacrifices it demanded of him. But now, sitting here, face to face with Ava and with Lily, He realized how much he had lost in the process, how much he had failed to see. "I don't know how to fix this," he said, his voice cracking as he leaned back against the couch, rubbing his hand over his face in frustration. "I don't know how to make up for all the time I've lost." "You don't have to fix it, Lucas," Ava replied, her voice calm but firm. "You just need to be here. That's all. Just be here." For her, Lucas turned his gaze to Lily, who was still playing with her toys, her little face intent on the tiny world she was creating. She looked so much like Ava. The same deep brown eyes, the same small but fierce determination. His chest tightened as he watched her, and in that moment, everything inside him shifted. "I don't even know how to be a father," Lucas admitted, his voice thick with emotion. "I don't know the first thing about raising a child. I've spent my whole life chasing after something that I thought mattered. But now I'm not even sure what I'm supposed to be doing." Ava was quiet for a long moment, and when she finally spoke, her words were soft, but filled with a wisdom that only years of experience could bring. "You don't need to know everything right away, Lucas. You don't need to have all the answers. All Lily needs is your presence, your love. That's what matters. You can start small. Just be there for her, the way she needs you to be." Lucas nodded slowly, taking in her words. For the first time in years, he felt like he was looking at the world through a different lens. Through a lens that didn't just focus on profit margins and quarterly earnings, but also on connection, on love. For the first time, he understood that love wasn't something you could control or predict. It was something you had to give freely, without expectation. "Do you think she'll forgive me?" Lucas asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "For not being here?" Ava gave him a sad smile. "She already has." Lucas looked back at Lily, who had now placed a tiny stuffed bear in his lap and was looking up at him with wide, trusting eyes. He reached out slowly, his hand trembling slightly as he touched the bear. In that small, innocent gesture, he felt something he hadn't felt in years. Hope. Hope that he could still be the man she needed him to be. Hope that despite the years he had lost, he could still build something with her. Something that mattered. For the first time in his life, Lucas Grant realized that success didn't come from numbers on a page, from contracts or stock prices. It came from the people you loved, from the relationships you nurtured, from the moments you shared with those who mattered most. And right now there was nothing in the world that mattered more than this small, fragile family. One that, in spite of everything, still had the chance to grow. The days that followed were a blur of emotions Lucas wasn't prepared for. Each time he saw Lily's bright eyes, or heard the soft sound of her laughter filling the room, it felt like his heart expanded in ways he never thought possible. Yet even as he found himself drawn to her, enchanted by the way she had already started to accept him as her father, there was a gnawing feeling that wouldn't let him rest. Ava's words echoed in his mind. "You don't have to fix it, Lucas. You just need to be here." But how could he simply be here? In his world, things were fixed with action, with hard decisions. He was a billionaire, a CEO who had spent his entire life solving problems. Being there, just being present, felt like a foreign concept. It wasn't enough, not in his world. He found himself staring at the skyline from his penthouse, his mind torn between his business, his responsibilities, and the growing pull toward the family he never knew he wanted. His life had been neatly compartmentalized for so long, but now those compartments were starting to crumble. "Lucas, you're quiet today," Ava said one evening as she set 2 glasses of wine on the coffee table between them. She had started coming over more frequently, though there was still a tension between them, a space they hadn't yet navigated. Lucas didn't immediately respond. Instead, he took the glass she offered, the rich red liquid swirling as he turned it in his hand. "I'm trying to figure out what happens next," he said finally, his voice rough. "I don't know how to be a father, or how to be a partner again." Ava's eyes softened as she sat across from him. She had been patient with him, giving him the space to process everything, but the distance between them was still palpable. Their past, their history, was a bridge neither of them knew how to cross. "Lucas, you're already being a father," Ava said quietly. "Just by being here, by spending time with Lily. It doesn't need to be any more complicated than that." He rubbed his thumb along the rim of the glass, avoiding her gaze. "I don't know if I can just be here, Ava. I'm not used to that. I've spent my life building things, controlling things. This feels like I'm out of control." Ava watched him carefully, her gaze searching his face as if trying to understand the depth of his internal struggle. "You've spent your whole life building an empire, Lucas. But it's not just about the empire anymore. You've got to let go of some of that control if you want a real family." The words hit him harder than he anticipated. He looked up at her, a flicker of uncertainty crossing his face. "I don't know if I can." Ava leaned forward slightly, her expression softening. "Maybe you don't need to. Maybe it's not about giving everything up. Maybe it's just about learning how to balance it all." There was a long pause before Lucas spoke again, his voice quieter now, almost a whisper. "I didn't realize what I was missing. I didn't realize that you, that Lily, were the ones I needed all along. But now I'm scared I've already missed too much. What if I can't fix what I've broken?" Ava's eyes softened with empathy, but there was no pity in her gaze. Instead, there was a quiet understanding, a recognition of the pain that came from years of misplaced priorities. "You can't change the past, Lucas, but you can start right now. You can be here, for both of us." His heart pounded in his chest. She was right, of course. The business would always be there. The deals, the endless demands of success. They would wait. But what would happen if he didn't show up for this? For the family he was only beginning to understand? He glanced over at the photos on the walls of her apartment, of Lily's first birthday, of her first steps. Each picture was a moment that Lucas had missed, a moment he couldn't go back to. It felt like a weight pressing on him, a reminder of everything he had neglected in pursuit of wealth and status. The sound of Lily's laughter from the next room broke his thoughts. He turned his head toward the sound, the warmth in her voice both soothing and piercing. In that moment he realized he was no longer standing on the outside looking in. He was here now, and he had a choice to make. "I don't know how to do this, Ava," he said softly. "I don't know how to be the father I should have been, but I want to try." Ava nodded, her gaze steady and reassuring. "That's all you need to do, Lucas. Try. It's all any of us can do." Later that evening, after Lily had gone to bed, Lucas and Ava sat together in the quiet of the apartment. Ava poured them both another glass of wine, the amber liquid gleaming in the dim light. The tension between them was still there, but something had shifted, something more subtle, more hopeful. Lucas felt it too. The space between them, once so filled with unresolved pain and silence, now felt charged with the possibility of something new. Perhaps it wasn't about rekindling their old relationship. It wasn't about returning to what they once had. It was about moving forward, together, for the sake of Lily. He took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the decision that loomed before him. "Ava, what happens next?" She met his gaze, her eyes steady but filled with uncertainty of her own. "We take it one day at a time, Lucas. We keep showing up, for her, for us." Lucas had spent his entire life building something others envied, an empire of wealth and influence. But now, as he sat across from Ava in the warmth of her apartment, he realized that the thing he had built was the very thing that had kept him from truly living. There was no blueprint for this kind of life, no set of rules that could tell him how to be a father, how to build a family. But in this moment, he understood something. Maybe it wasn't about perfecting everything. Maybe it wasn't about control. It was about showing up, about trying, no matter how messy it got. And for the first time, he felt the pulse of something deeper, something more lasting. Perhaps this was what success truly looked like. The next morning, Lucas stood in the doorway of Ava's apartment, the cool morning air drifting through the open window, carrying with it the faint hum of the city waking up. He had stayed the night, though they had both said little after dinner. The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable, but it wasn't easy either. It was the kind of silence that spoke volumes, of things unsaid, of what they both knew was starting to shift between them. Ava was in the kitchen, preparing breakfast for Lily, her movements efficient and practiced, as though she had done this 1,000 times. She was humming softly to herself, the sound soothing and familiar. Lucas watched her for a moment, her presence in the kitchen so domestic, so different from the life he had known. He had spent years in a world where everything was curated, controlled, and executed with precision. Yet here, in this apartment, he felt as if he were part of something raw and unfiltered. And part of him, a large part, was terrified. Lily's laughter filtered through from the living room, and Lucas felt the same tightening in his chest that had become so familiar over the last few days. This was his life now. This little girl, and the woman standing in front of him, had become the center of his world in the blink of an eye. But how could he continue to walk this path when so much of his past still loomed over him? "Hey," he said, breaking the silence, his voice softer than he intended. Ava turned, giving him a small smile. "Morning. I didn't expect you to be up so early." He smiled back, though it didn't reach his eyes. "I couldn't sleep much." Ava raised an eyebrow, as if questioning whether the answer was about something deeper. But instead of pushing, she simply nodded and returned to the stove. "Coffee's on. I'll make some eggs for you." Lucas stepped closer, his gaze flickering over the kitchen, the small details that Ava had added to make this space hers. It wasn't the pristine, high-tech kitchen in his penthouse. It wasn't even close. But it had life, warmth, a quiet sense of belonging that was foreign to him. And for the first time in years, it made him uncomfortable in a way that wasn't entirely unpleasant. "Ava, He cut himself off, not sure what he was trying to say, what he wanted from her. Words had always been his tool. He could command a room, negotiate with the best in the business. But this was different. His voice faltered again, his chest tightening. "I don't know what to do with all of this." Ava's back was to him as she stirred the eggs, but her voice was steady. "You don't have to know everything right away, Lucas. You just need to show up." "For her, I've been showing up," he said quietly, his frustration creeping into his voice. "But I feel like I'm drowning in things I don't understand. I'm supposed to be her father, but I feel like a stranger. I didn't even know I had a daughter, Ava. How am I supposed to make up for all that time?" There was a long pause before Ava turned to face him, her expression softer than he expected. She put the spatula down and wiped her hands on a dish towel before walking toward him. "Lucas," she began gently, her voice steady, but tinged with something close to sadness. "I don't want you to feel like you have to make up for everything. You can't. What matters now is what you do next, what you do from here." "I know," he murmured, running a hand through his hair. He hated the vulnerability he felt, hated how exposed he was. "But that doesn't make it easier. I don't know how to fix the mistakes I've made, or if I even can." Ava's gaze softened, her eyes searching his face, trying to find the man she had once loved beneath the layers of armor he had built around himself. "You don't need to fix everything, Lucas. All Lily needs is you to be here, to be present, to be her father." "I don't know how," he admitted, feeling the weight of his own inadequacies. He was used to taking charge, to making things happen, but this was different. "I've spent my whole life chasing something that I thought mattered, and now everything feels backwards." Ava's lips quirked slightly as she reached for the plate of eggs, sliding it onto the counter. "Well, life has a funny way of doing that," she said, her voice light. "But you don't need to figure everything out today. You just need to show up, like you are now. You've already taken the hardest step by being here." Lucas swallowed, looking at the woman who had once been everything to him, the woman who had left because of his inability to be there. And yet, here they were again, in this small kitchen, trying to navigate a future neither of them had planned. Lily's voice broke through their conversation, calling out from the living room, and Ava's eyes softened as she looked toward the sound. "I guess we'd better feed the little one before she starts raiding the pantry," she said with a small smile. Lucas nodded, still caught in the whirlwind of his thoughts. He followed Ava as she brought the food to the table, setting down 2 plates in front of Lily, who was already seated, her legs swinging impatiently beneath her. "Daddy, are you going to sit with us?" Lily asked, her eyes wide with curiosity. The question hit Lucas like a wave. He had been sitting on the outside for so long, and now this tiny, trusting creature was asking him to take his rightful place. And for the first time in his life, he didn't feel like he had to be perfect. He didn't have to have all the answers. He just had to be present. "Yeah, sweetie," Lucas said, his voice rough. "I'm going to sit with you." He sat down beside her, the weight of the moment settling around him. He watched as Ava served them both, her hands sure and steady. The world outside this apartment, his empire, his business, faded into the background as he sat there, surrounded by warmth, by family, by the possibility of something he never thought he would have. For the first time in years, Lucas felt something he hadn't been able to name before: belonging. The following week felt like a slow, steady unraveling. Each day, Lucas tried to convince himself that he was making progress. He spent more time at Ava's apartment, helping her with Lily, attending the small, everyday moments he had previously overlooked. It was strange at first, awkward even. But something began to shift within him. He found himself looking forward to the evenings, to sitting with Ava and Lily, to the quiet moments that felt like they mattered more than anything else. But as much as he wanted to believe in this new version of himself, the father, the man who could just be, he couldn't quite shake the pull of his old life. Every phone call from his assistant, every new deal on the table, pulled him back into the world he had built. The empire he had spent so many years constructing was never far from his mind, and it began to eat away at the space he had made for his new family. One evening, after Lily had gone to bed, Lucas found himself standing by the window in Ava's living room, staring out at the city. The skyline looked different now, distant, detached, as though he were no longer a part of it. His phone buzzed in his pocket, and when he checked it, the familiar name of his business partner, Samuel Reynolds, flashed on the screen. He felt a pang of guilt, the kind he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years. Samuel had been trying to reach him all day, and each time Lucas had ignored the calls. "Hey, Sam," he said, trying to sound casual, his voice rough from the weight of his own conflicting thoughts. "Lucas," Sam's voice crackled through the line, "I need you in the meeting tomorrow. The board's pushing for a decision on the acquisition. We've got a tight window, and you're the only one who can pull this off. I don't care if you're busy. This is priority 1. Lucas felt the familiar surge of adrenaline that came with work. the pull of responsibility that never let him go. He'd spent years building this company into something that demanded attention, something that fed his need for control. And now, that same world was demanding his focus once again. "I'll be there," Lucas said, trying to keep the edge of frustration out of his voice. "I'll make it happen." He ended the call quickly, his hand tightening around the phone. For a moment he simply stood there, staring at the city below, feeling the weight of the decision that had been building in his chest for days. Ava appeared in the doorway, her figure silhouetted by the soft light of the kitchen. She had been in the other room, cleaning up after dinner, but now she stood there watching him. "Everything okay?" Her voice was calm, but there was an edge of concern in it, a knowing that made Lucas feel exposed. He turned, his mind still buzzing with the remnants of the conversation. "Yeah," he said, forcing a smile, though it didn't reach his eyes. "Just business stuff." Ava took a step closer, her gaze softening as she noticed the strain in his posture. "Lucas, I know you're dealing with a lot right now, but don't forget about the other side of your life, the one that's here, with us." Her words hit him harder than he expected. He had tried so hard to convince himself that he was balancing everything, his work, his family, but the truth was he had been slipping back into old habits, letting the world of deals and deadlines encroach on the space he had so desperately wanted to fill with love and connection. "I'm trying, Ava," he said, his voice low, but there was an edge of frustration in it now. "I am. But you don't understand. I can't just walk away from everything I've built. I've spent my entire life building this empire. And now you want me to just let it go?" Ava's face hardened slightly, her jaw set. She took another step toward him, her voice unwavering. "I'm not asking you to let it go. I'm asking you to be here, to choose to be here, to choose us. You can't keep running back to that world every time things get difficult." Lucas felt the familiar pull of guilt, but beneath it, something else was rising, something unfamiliar, something he hadn't felt in years: vulnerability. He had spent so long in control, so long behind walls he had built around himself, that the idea of truly letting go, of choosing something different, terrified him. "I don't know how to do that," he whispered, more to himself than to her. "I don't know how to just be here, Ava. I've never known how." For a moment there was only silence between them. The weight of his words hung in the air, and Ava's expression softened. She reached for him, her hand gentle on his arm. "You're not alone in this, Lucas," she said, her voice calm now, soothing. "I'm here, Lily's here. You don't have to figure it all out by yourself." Lucas closed his eyes, the tension in his chest easing just slightly at her touch. But even as he let himself sink into the moment, he knew that he couldn't keep avoiding the choices that were looming over him. He couldn't keep hiding behind the walls of his business, of his success, and pretend like it didn't matter that he had a daughter, a family. He opened his eyes, meeting her gaze. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "I haven't been here the way you need me to be." Ava nodded, the soft lines of her face relaxing, but there was still a trace of doubt in her eyes. "It's not too late, Lucas, but it's going to take more than just showing up. It's going to take all of you, not just the parts that fit into your world of control and ambition." Lucas felt a pang of guilt, the kind that cut deeper than any business failure ever had. I know I've been selfish." Ava sighed, looking away for a moment as if searching for the right words. "I don't want to go back to what we had before, Lucas. I don't want to pretend like everything's fine. But if you really want to be a part of this, if you want to be a part of her life, it's going to take more than just apologies. It's going to take action." The words stung, but they were true. He had spent so long building his empire, but in the process, he had neglected the most important thing of all, the people who mattered. For the first time, Lucas felt a deep sense of clarity. He couldn't keep pretending he could have it all without sacrificing the things that truly mattered. It wasn't just about success and wealth. It was about love, connection, and the family he never realized he had. "I'm ready," he said, his voice quiet but determined. "I'm ready to make it right, for both of you." Ava studied him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then, slowly, she nodded. "I believe you." Lucas stood at the threshold of his penthouse, the cool glass of the door pressing against his palm as he took in the city below. Chicago's skyline stretched before him, gleaming under the late afternoon sun, a concrete jungle where he had spent years building his empire. Every inch of it felt like a monument to his success, a world he had crafted with his own hands. But today, standing here, it all seemed distant, hollow, as though it belonged to someone else entirely. He had spent hours in his office, but his thoughts kept drifting back to Ava and Lily. He had gone through the motions of business, phone calls, meetings, decisions about mergers, but his mind couldn't stay focused. Every minute spent in this world felt like a betrayal of the time he knew he should be spending with them. The sound of the elevator doors opening behind him broke his reverie, and he turned, expecting to see his assistant, but instead it was Samuel Reynolds. His business partner stepped into the room, a broad grin on his face, but it faltered slightly when he saw Lucas's distracted expression. "Long day?" Samuel asked, his tone light but perceptive. Lucas didn't immediately respond. Instead, he walked toward the window, his hands slipping into his pockets as he surveyed the city below. Samuel followed, his footsteps light on the polished floors. "You've been quiet lately," Samuel said, crossing his arms. "You've missed a couple of meetings, and the board's starting to ask questions." Lucas's jaw tightened. The truth was he had been avoiding Samuel's calls, leaving him to handle the daily grind. But it wasn't just the business that had him preoccupied. There was something else gnawing at him, something far more significant than any deal or acquisition. "I've been busy," Lucas said, his voice rough, as though he were trying to convince himself more than anyone else. Samuel raised an eyebrow. "Busy with what? I get that the deal with the Mitchell Group is big, but you've never let something like that distract you. We both know the stakes. So what's going on, Lucas?" The question hit him harder than he anticipated. He had always kept his personal life separate from his work, kept his emotions in check, compartmentalized. But lately those boundaries were starting to blur. He didn't want to admit it, but Samuel could see right through him. "Something's changed," Lucas muttered, his voice barely audible. "I've been spending time with Ava and Lily." Samuel's eyes narrowed, a knowing look crossing his face. "Ava? As in your ex-wife?" Lucas nodded, unable to hide the conflict in his expression. "Yeah, I didn't expect it either, but she's been trying to help me see things differently. With Lily." Samuel let out a low whistle, stepping closer to Lucas. "So that's it then? You're letting your personal life take over? You've always said you couldn't afford distractions. You've worked too hard to let a woman, your ex-wife no less, get in the way." Lucas stiffened at his words, but deep down, he knew Samuel wasn't wrong. He had spent years building this life, this empire, and now it felt like everything he had worked for was crumbling under the weight of new responsibilities. But the more time he spent with Ava and Lily, the more he realized that what he had was far more important than any business deal. "I didn't expect it to be this hard," Lucas said, his voice quiet. "But I can't keep pretending that it doesn't matter. They matter. She matters." There was a long pause before Samuel spoke again, his voice softer now, but still tinged with concern. "I get it, Lucas. I do. But you have to realize that you can't have both. You can't build your empire and expect to be there for them. Something's going to give, and right now the board is starting to see the cracks. They're wondering if you're losing focus. Lucas turned to face him, his expression hardening. "You think I don't know that?" he snapped. "You think I haven't been torn apart by this? But I can't keep living in this bubble where work is all that matters. It's not all that matters anymore." Samuel opened his mouth, but before he could say anything else, the sudden buzzing of Lucas's phone interrupted them. He looked down at the screen, his stomach dropping when he saw the caller ID. Ava. He glanced at Samuel, who had noticed the phone as well. There was a brief moment of silence. Then Samuel gave him a knowing look. "Answer it," Samuel said, his voice low but encouraging. "It sounds like you have a decision to make." Lucas didn't hesitate. He swiped the screen and pressed the phone to his ear, the tension in his chest tightening. "Ava?" His voice was rough, but he tried to mask the underlying strain. "Lucas." Ava's voice was calm, but he could hear the worry in it. "I need to talk to you. It's about Lily." The mention of their daughter instantly pushed everything else aside. He could feel his heart rate pick up as he moved toward the door, gesturing for Samuel to stay behind. "I'll be right there," Lucas said, already moving toward the elevator. "Is she okay?" "She's fine," Ava said quickly, though her voice had an edge of urgency. "But we need to discuss something. It's important." "I'm on my way," Lucas said, ending the call before he could hear another word. As the elevator doors closed, he leaned back against the wall, his mind racing. What could possibly be so urgent? A small part of him feared that whatever this was, it would pull him further away from the path he had just started to walk. The path where he chose to be with Ava and Lily. When the elevator reached the ground floor, Lucas stepped out, his footsteps echoing in the quiet lobby. His phone buzzed again, and he looked down to find a message from Samuel. "Whatever you decide, I hope it's the right choice." The words hit him harder than he expected, and for a moment he was overwhelmed with doubt. Was he making the right choice? Could he balance this new life with everything he had spent his career building? Could he be both the father and the businessman, the lover and the leader? As he walked out into the crisp evening air, his thoughts churned with uncertainty. But one thing was becoming painfully clear. He couldn't keep pretending. He had to choose. And whatever choice he made, there would be no going back. Lucas drove through the streets of Chicago with the windows rolled down, the evening breeze brushing against his face, but it did little to cool the tension that simmered beneath his skin. His phone sat in the cup holder beside him, a silent reminder of the call from Ava, still unanswered. It wasn't that he didn't want to hear her voice or speak with her. He just needed to think, to let the weight of everything settle before he made another move. A small part of him wanted to believe he could do it all, that he could be both the man who built his empire and the father who showed up every day. But the conversations with Samuel, the pressure from the board, and the look in Ava's eyes had convinced him that it wasn't that simple. When he finally parked outside Ava's building, he felt the same uncertainty that had followed him all day. It was an unfamiliar feeling, a feeling that had nothing to do with stock prices, quarterly results, or acquisitions. This wasn't something he could measure in spreadsheets or quarterly reports. It was raw. It was human. He climbed out of the car and made his way to the entrance of the building. Ava's message had been urgent, but she hadn't said why. It only made the uncertainty inside him grow. The elevator ride was silent, and when the doors opened, he stepped into the hallway, his heart racing for reasons he couldn't explain. The apartment door was ajar, and as he knocked softly, Ava's voice called out from inside, "Come in." He entered, and the first thing he noticed was the stillness in the apartment. The air felt thick, charged, as if something important had just shifted. Ava was sitting on the couch, her eyes focused on the floor, her hands resting in her lap. She looked up when she heard him enter, her gaze soft but serious. "You're here," she said quietly, standing as he approached. "Of course I'm here," he replied, though the uncertainty in his voice betrayed him. "What's going on, Ava?" She hesitated, as if weighing the best way to start. "It's about Lily," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. She's been asking questions. About you." Lucas's heart skipped a beat. The tension in the room suddenly felt suffocating. He swallowed hard, the weight of her words settling on him. "What kind of questions?" he asked, his voice tight. Ava stood up, her hands moving to straighten the edges of a cushion on the couch, a nervous habit. "She asked why you weren't there when she was born," she said. "She's old enough to understand that families don't just appear out of nowhere. She's been asking why she's never met you before, why you weren't there for her." The silence stretched between them, the weight of the unspoken words hanging in the air. Lucas felt the sting of guilt prick at his chest, a sharp reminder of everything he had missed, everything he had chosen not to see. "She's too young for this," he said, his voice strained. "I can't answer questions like that." Ava's eyes softened, but there was something else in them now, something that made Lucas feel like he was standing on the edge of something he couldn't control. "She's not too young," Ava said, her voice quiet but firm. "She deserves the truth. We can't keep pretending. If we're going to do this, if we're going to be a family, we have to be honest with her. We can't keep hiding behind silence." Lucas ran a hand through his hair, pacing the length of the room. "I don't know if I'm ready for that. I don't know if I'm ready to be a father, not the kind she deserves. Not the kind of father I should have been." He stopped, his chest tightening as the weight of his words hit him. "I've spent my whole life building this empire, and I've missed her. I've missed all of it. And now she's asking questions I can't answer." Ava walked over to him, her hand gently touching his arm. Her touch was steady, grounding him, but it only deepened the ache inside him. "I'm not asking for perfection, Lucas. I'm asking for you to show up, to be here for her. She doesn't need you to be perfect. She just needs you to be real." His throat tightened, and for a moment he couldn't speak. The words that had been locked in his chest for so long seemed impossible to find. He had always been a man of action, of precision. He fixed things. But fixing his past, his mistakes, was beyond him. "What if I mess it up?" Lucas asked, the question slipping from his lips before he could stop it. "What if I'm not enough?" Ava's expression softened, and she stepped closer, her voice quiet but full of conviction. "You're already enough, Lucas. You just have to be willing to try, for her, for us." He felt a knot twist in his stomach. For us. The words were like a lifeline, but they also felt like a weight. Could he really do this? Could he be the father Lily needed? Could he be the man Ava deserved? "I don't know if I can be everything you need," Lucas said quietly, his voice rough. Ava's eyes locked with his, her gaze unwavering. "You don't have to be everything, Lucas. You just have to be there. Show up. That's all I need." Lucas closed his eyes for a moment, letting her words sink in. He didn't have all the answers. Hell, he didn't have most of the answers. But he knew one thing. He couldn't keep running away from this. He couldn't keep hiding behind his work, his empire. He had to show up. For Lily. For Ava. "I'll try," he said, his voice hoarse. "I don't know if I can get it right, but I'll try." Ava smiled, a small, soft smile that reached her eyes. "That's all I need, Lucas. That's all any of us need." The week that followed was the most uncertain Lucas had ever experienced. Every morning he woke up with the same question gnawing at him. Am I doing enough? He'd been spending more time at Ava's apartment, trying to be the father Lily needed him to be, trying to be there for both of them. But as the days passed, the weight of his own doubt only grew heavier. Ava was patient with him, but there was something in her eyes that he couldn't ignore. She wanted him to be more than just physically present. She wanted him to be emotionally invested, to show up fully for their little family. But how could he do that when he wasn't even sure how to navigate the complexities of their new life? Lucas found himself sitting at the dining table late one evening, the glow of the city lights streaming through the window. He had just finished a call with Samuel, his partner, who had pressed him once again for his decision on the Mitchell Group acquisition. The deal was looming, and with it came the familiar pull of ambition, the need to close, to succeed, to keep the empire he had built intact. But as he ended the call, the realization hit him again. He couldn't keep running from the life he was building with Ava and Lily. His thoughts were interrupted by the sound of footsteps. He turned to see Ava standing in the doorway, her expression serious, but her eyes soft. She had been quiet all evening, and he could sense something was weighing on her, just as it was on him. "I've been thinking," she began, her voice steady but laced with a vulnerability that tugged at his heart, "about what you said the other day, about trying." Lucas felt his stomach tighten. He hadn't realized how much he had been holding back until she mentioned it. The quiet pressure between them had been building, and it was clear that both of them had been waiting for the other to take the next step. But in this new life they were building, there was no blueprint, no clear map to follow. "I'm trying, Ava," he said, the words coming out more defensively than he intended. He stood up, pacing the length of the room, trying to settle his racing thoughts. "But I don't know if that's enough. I've never had to just be before. I've always had to fix things, make them happen. But this feels different. I feel like I'm standing in the middle of two worlds, and I'm afraid I'm failing in both." Ava watched him closely, her gaze unwavering. She stepped forward, closing the distance between them. "You're not failing, Lucas. You're here. You're showing up. That's the most important thing." He shook his head, frustration building within him. "It doesn't feel like enough, Ava. I keep thinking about the company, about everything I've worked for. I can't just walk away from that. I can't abandon what I've built." Ava's expression softened, and she reached out to gently touch his arm. Her voice was quiet, but there was a firmness to it that grounded him. "You don't have to abandon anything, Lucas. But if you want to be a part of this, of us, you have to let go of some of that control. You have to let yourself feel things you can't measure, can't fix. You've been running for so long that you don't know how to stop." Lucas closed his eyes, the weight of her words sinking in. He had spent his entire life building something. But now, as he stood at the crossroads of his career and his personal life, he realized that what he had built might not be enough to fill the void in his heart. "Ava," he said, his voice quieter now, more vulnerable. "I'm scared. I'm scared that I'll lose everything if I let go. I've spent my whole life chasing success, and now I'm not sure if I even know who I am without it." She stepped closer, her hand brushing against his chest, and for a moment he was lost in the connection between them. There was no judgment in her eyes, only understanding, the kind of understanding that came from shared history and raw emotions. "You're not alone in this, Lucas," she said softly. "I'm here, and I believe in you." The words settled deep inside him, like a balm on a wound he hadn't even known was there. For so long he had buried his feelings, buried the parts of himself that weren't about work or success. But now As he looked into Ava's eyes, he realized that the foundation of his life could no longer be built on just ambition. There had to be something more, something real, something that tied him to the people who loved him. Lucas reached for her, his fingers trembling slightly as he cupped her face, bringing her closer. "I don't know if I can be the man you need me to be," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "But I want to try. For you." For Lily, Ava smiled, a soft, tender smile that reached her eyes, and for the first time in a long time, Lucas felt something break inside him. The walls that had kept him safe but isolated began to crumble. "You're already doing it, Lucas," she said, her voice a quiet assurance. "You're here. That's enough." Just as he leaned in to kiss her, the sound of small feet running toward them interrupted the moment. Lucas turned to see Lily standing at the edge of the room, her wide brown eyes fixed on him. She had been quiet for the last hour, and he hadn't realized how much he had been avoiding the most important part of his new reality, the bond with her. Lily stood there, holding a stuffed animal in her arms, her innocent gaze filled with curiosity. "Are you going to be my daddy forever now?" she asked, her voice small but sincere. The question hung in the air, and for a moment, Lucas didn't know how to answer. But then he knelt down in front of her, his heart swelling as he saw the trust in her eyes. "I don't know what forever looks like," he said softly, "but I'm going to be here. For as long as you'll let me." Lily smiled, her small hand reaching for his. "I want you to stay," she said simply. Lucas felt his chest tighten, the weight of her words crashing over him. He realized then that this wasn't just about being a good father. It was about being present, about choosing to stay. In a world where he had always been focused on control, he was finally learning to let go. "I'll stay," he promised, his voice thick with emotion. "For you, for Ava, for us. I'll stay." The morning sun had barely begun to rise, casting a soft glow over the city, when Lucas woke to the sound of his phone buzzing on the nightstand. His first instinct was to ignore it, to let the world wait, but when he glanced at the screen, he saw it was a message from Samuel. "We need to talk. It's urgent." Lucas's stomach tightened. He hadn't responded to his business partner in days. The demands of the Mitchell Group acquisition still loomed large, but he had made a conscious choice to put his personal life first. That choice had meant showing up for Ava, for Lily, for the family he was still learning how to be a part of. But the weight of his empire, the business that had been his life for so long, was never far behind. He rubbed his eyes, trying to clear the remnants of sleep from his mind, but as he stood up and walked toward the window, the weight of the decision he was facing seemed to press in on him. He had promised Ava that he would stay. He had promised himself that he would try to build something real. But now, the very thing that had always defined him, the empire he had worked so hard to build, was threatening to pull him away from everything he had come to care about. With a sigh, Lucas tapped out a response to Samuel. "I'll be at the office in an hour." He turned to the bathroom, ready to face the day, but the thought of leaving the apartment, of leaving Ava and Lily behind for the first time in days, felt like a weight on his chest. Later that morning, Lucas found himself in the familiar glass-walled conference room at the top of his building, looking down at the sprawling city below. Samuel sat across from him, the usual confidence in his posture replaced by a tightness Lucas hadn't seen before. "You've been avoiding me, Lucas," Samuel said, his voice low but with an edge that was harder to ignore. "We need to talk about the acquisition. The board's been pressuring me, and they want answers. You've been distracted. Hell, we've all been distracted. And the deal's slipping." Lucas sat back in his chair, running a hand through his hair. "I know," he muttered. "I've been preoccupied." Samuel's eyes narrowed and he leaned forward, his gaze sharp. "This is what you've worked your entire life for, Lucas. You've put everything into this business. You can't just drop it now because you're playing house with your ex-wife and her kid. What are you going to do? Walk away from the deal? Let everything you've built crumble?" The words cut deeper than Lucas expected. He had spent his entire adult life focused on his career, his company, his success. But now, as the weight of Samuel's words hung in the air, Lucas felt something he hadn't allowed himself to feel before. Doubt. Was he really willing to lose everything just to try to be something he wasn't sure he could be? "I'm not walking away from it," Lucas replied, his voice steady but edged with tension. "I just don't know how to balance it all, Sam. I can't keep running between two worlds. I can't be the CEO who's always chasing deals and the father who's trying to be there for his daughter. And it's not just Lily, it's Ava too. I promised her I would try, but now I'm not sure I can be everything." Samuel didn't respond immediately, but his gaze softened, almost imperceptibly. He knew Lucas better than anyone else. They had built this empire together, and Samuel had seen the sacrifices Lucas had made. He'd seen the late nights, the relentless drive, the unwillingness to give anything less than everything. Finally, Samuel leaned back in his chair, his expression more serious. "You think I don't get it? You think I haven't watched you tear yourself apart for this business? I've been by your side every step of the way. But here's the thing, Lucas. You've built something great, but it's not everything. You're losing sight of the one thing that matters. You can't build a family like you build a company. You can't control it. It's messy, it's unpredictable, but it's real. And that's what you have to decide. Are you willing to risk it all for something you can't control?" The question hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Lucas felt a shift inside him, a crack in the armor he had spent years constructing around his emotions. Could Samuel be right? Could it really be that simple? Was it about showing up? Was it about trying to be real in a world that had taught him to be anything but? "I don't know what I'm supposed to do anymore," Lucas admitted, his voice thick with frustration. "I want this life with Ava and Lily. I want to be the man they need, but I'm terrified that I'll fail them. I'm terrified that everything I've worked for will slip through my fingers." Samuel didn't reply immediately, but when he did, his tone was softer. "You don't have to have all the answers, Lucas. You just have to make a choice, a real one. And then, you have to live with it. But don't keep living in two worlds. You're killing yourself trying to be everywhere at once." The words hit Lucas like a ton of bricks. He had always prided himself on being in control, on being the one who could juggle it all. But the truth was, he was exhausted. He couldn't keep pretending that he had all the answers. He had to make a choice. That afternoon, as Lucas walked back into Ava's apartment, he felt the weight of his decision settling in. The apartment was quiet, the soft sounds of Lily playing in the other room, reminding him of everything he had to lose. Ava was sitting on the couch, her expression unreadable as she looked up from the book she had been reading. "How was the meeting?" she asked, her voice calm but with a hint of something beneath it. Something that told Lucas she was waiting for him to make a decision too. Lucas took a deep breath before answering, his gaze locking with hers. "It was what I expected. The deal's on the line, and Samuel's pushing me to make a call. But I realized something today, Ava." He paused, the words forming in his chest, unsure of how to say them. "I can't keep pretending that I can do it all. I can't keep running between two worlds. I've spent my life building this empire, but now I have something real, something that matters more than anything." Ava's expression softened and she stood, moving toward him. "Lucas, you don't have to explain yourself. I just need you to be here, for us." He nodded, his heart full with the weight of the decision he had made. "I'm here," And I'm not going anywhere. The silence between them wasn't filled with words, but with something far deeper. An understanding. A commitment. Lucas didn't have all the answers, but for the first time in his life, he was willing to stop chasing perfection. He was ready to embrace the messy, unpredictable love that Ava and Lily were offering him. He was ready to show up. It was a week later, and Lucas sat on the edge of the couch in Ava's apartment, his mind swirling with everything that had happened, and everything that was yet to come. The decision he had made, the choice to finally show up for the people who truly mattered, felt like a weight lifting from his chest. But with it came a new set of challenges, a new level of vulnerability he wasn't quite prepared for. He glanced over at Ava, who was sitting next to him, but her eyes were distant, focused on the soft flicker of the lamp on the table. It wasn't unusual for her to be quiet, but there was something different in the air tonight, something unspoken between them. He could feel it in the way she shifted her gaze when he looked at her, how her lips pressed together as though she were trying to say something but didn't know where to begin. "Ava," he said, his voice hesitant, as if he were treading carefully across unfamiliar ground. She blinked, her eyes meeting his. Are you okay?" The question sounded simple, but it was one he hadn't asked in a long time, not really. He'd been so wrapped up in his own struggles, his need to balance his work with this newfound family, that he hadn't taken the time to truly ask about her. Ava looked at him for a long moment, her lips parting as if she were about to speak, but then she shook her head, her expression soft but conflicted. "I'm fine, Lucas. It's just—" She trailed off, and he could feel the tension in her words. "What is it?" Lucas pressed gently, leaning in a little closer. "You can tell me. We've been doing this, being real with each other, right? So, if something's wrong, you have to let me know." She hesitated, her eyes flicking to the side, and then back to him. For a moment he almost wondered if she would retreat into her usual quiet composure, the walls she had built so carefully around herself. But then, with a deep breath, she spoke again. "It's Lily," she said, her voice low but her eyes filled with emotion. "I can see how hard this is for you, how much you're trying. But I'm not sure you're ready for the responsibility. Not yet." Lucas's heart skipped a beat. Her words hit him like a wave, and for a moment he wasn't sure if he had heard her correctly. He had thought, after everything he'd done, that things were improving, that he had started showing up in the way she needed him to. But now he understood that there were still pieces missing, things he hadn't even realized he needed to work on. "I'm trying, Ava," he said, his voice thick with a mix of frustration and vulnerability. "I swear I'm trying. I know I've made mistakes. I know I haven't been perfect. But I'm here. I want to be here. I want to be the father Lily deserves. The man you deserve." Ava shook her head slowly, and the sadness in her eyes caught him off guard. "I know you do, Lucas. But wanting it isn't the same as being ready for it. And Lily—" She stopped, looking down at her hands. "She's been through so much already. She needs more than promises. She needs someone who can show up every day without hesitation. And right now, I'm not sure you're ready for that." The words cut deeper than anything she had said before. Lucas felt his chest tighten as a wave of guilt washed over him. He had been so focused on balancing the demands of his work with his personal life, so wrapped up in the idea of being the perfect father and partner, that he hadn't truly understood the depth of what Ava was asking of him. It wasn't about just being there. It was about consistency, stability, two things he hadn't been able to offer fully. He had always believed that he could fix things with enough effort, that he could juggle everything and make it work. But now, faced with the reality of what Ava was saying, he understood the truth. Some things couldn't be fixed by effort alone. They required time, patience, and the willingness to show up, day in and day out. "I don't know how to prove it to you," Lucas said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know how to show you that I'm ready, that I can be the man she needs." Ava reached out, placing a hand on his, her touch gentle but firm. "You don't have to prove anything, Lucas. I'm not asking you to be perfect, but you need to understand that Lily needs someone who can give her more than just promises. She needs someone who can be there when it matters most, and that's something you have to be ready for." There was a long pause, and Lucas couldn't shake the weight of her words. It wasn't just about making big gestures or offering grand apologies. It was about showing up when the world felt heavy, about being present in the moments that mattered most. He had always measured success by tangible results, but now he understood that success in this new life required a different kind of measurement, a deeper, more intimate understanding of what it meant to be a father, to be a partner. "I want to be ready," Lucas said, his voice raw with sincerity. "But I need your help. I don't know how to do this alone." Ava's eyes softened as she looked at him, and for the first time, Lucas saw a glimmer of hope in her gaze. "You're not alone, Lucas. But you have to let go of your need to control everything. You have to trust that it's okay to be imperfect." Lucas nodded, feeling the weight of her words settle over him. He had spent so many years controlling every aspect of his life, thinking that success was the only thing that mattered. But now, standing here with Ava, with the reality of fatherhood pressing against him, he realized that the real work had only just begun. "I'll keep trying," he said, his voice steady with determination. "For you, for Lily, I'll keep showing up, but I need you to be patient with me." Ava smiled faintly, the tension in her shoulders easing just a little. "We'll figure it out together, Lucas, one step at a time." And in that moment, Lucas knew that this wasn't going to be easy. It wasn't going to be perfect. But as long as he kept showing up, as long as he kept trying, there was a chance. A chance to be the man they needed him to be. A chance to be a father, a partner, and maybe, just maybe, a better version of himself. The following weeks were filled with a quiet tension that Lucas couldn't shake. He was present, in the physical sense, but in his mind, he was constantly torn between the life he was trying to build with Ava and Lily and the empire he had spent years constructing. Every day he had to remind himself that showing up, really showing up, was enough. That just being there, even in the small moments, was a victory. But it wasn't always easy. There were days when the pull of his work was so strong that it threatened to drag him back into the world he knew so well. The boardrooms, the deals, the relentless drive for success. And each time, he had to make a choice. To pick up the phone, or to leave it. To answer that email, or to sit down with Lily and watch her play. Ava had been patient with him, but even she couldn't hide the moments of doubt that flickered in her eyes. She had given him her trust, but trust wasn't something that could be earned in a few weeks. It would take time, and Lucas knew that time was something he couldn't afford to waste. It was a Saturday morning when he found himself at Ava's apartment again, watching her prepare breakfast in the kitchen. The scent of fresh coffee and scrambled eggs filled the air, and Lily was humming softly as she set the table, a small, determined frown on her face as she tried to balance a stack of plates. Lucas had spent the night at his penthouse trying to catch up on work, but the moment he walked back into the apartment, he felt the familiar weight of his decision looming over him. He had to stay present. He had to keep showing up for them, no matter how hard it was to walk away from everything else. As he entered the kitchen, Ava glanced over her shoulder, offering him a small smile. "Morning." "Morning," he said, his voice gruff from lack of sleep. "You guys get up early around here?" Ava laughed softly, shaking her head. It's the only way to keep Lily on track. You're lucky you're not on breakfast duty. I'll take your word for it. He walked over to the counter where Lily was now stacking the last plate on the table. You need help? Lily's face lit up when she saw him, a mixture of hope and eagerness in her eyes. You can sit with me, Daddy, she said, pulling out a chair with both hands and patting the seat beside her. Lucas smiled, his chest tightening at the word. Daddy. It still felt new, awkward, but also right. The little girl who had once looked at him with uncertainty and confusion was starting to accept him into her world, and every small moment felt like progress. He sat down beside her, glancing over at Ava, who was placing the last of the eggs on the table. She caught his gaze, and for a moment they exchanged a quiet understanding. She didn't need him to be perfect. She just needed him to be there. She had said it before, but hearing it again in her eyes felt like a promise. Lily set down her fork, looking from one parent to the other. Are you going to stay for a long time? She asked, her voice soft but hopeful. The question hit Lucas like a wave. He had been spending more time with them, but the future still felt uncertain. He knew what Lily needed. A constant. A father who was there when he said he would be. But he wasn't sure how to give her that when the rest of his life still clung to him. I'm here, sweetie, Lucas said, his voice gentle but with an underlying determination. I'm not going anywhere. Lily smiled brightly, clearly satisfied with the answer. Good. I like it when you're here. Ava walked around the table, sitting down across from him. She didn't say anything at first, but there was a weight in her silence, a quiet expectation. Lucas could feel it in the way she looked at him. Still waiting, still hoping. He turned his attention to his plate, focusing on the food for a moment. His mind, however, was far from the scrambled eggs in front of him. He was thinking of the call from Samuel earlier in the week, the one he had ignored in favor of staying home with Ava and Lily. The pressure of the Mitchell Group deal was only growing, and Samuel had made it clear that Lucas couldn't avoid the decision forever. I've been thinking, Lucas began slowly, his voice measured. Ava looked up, giving him her full attention, her hands folded in her lap. About the deal. Mitchell Group. I know I've been avoiding it. Ava didn't say anything at first, but her eyes were full of understanding. She had always known how much his business meant to him, how deeply he was tied to his success. And she had also seen the shift in him, the way he had started to let go of some of his old habits, the way he had made room for something bigger than himself. You don't have to explain it to me, Lucas, she said quietly. I know what it means to you, but I also know that you're trying. I see it. I can't let you get lost in it again. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Lucas had never realized just how much he had taken his ambition for granted, how much of his life had been driven by the need to prove himself, to build something that no one could take away. But now, as he looked at Ava, at Lily, he knew that something had shifted in him. He reached across the table, his hand brushing against hers, and for a moment, the world outside seemed to disappear. He wasn't just the billionaire CEO anymore. He was a father, a partner, someone who was learning what it meant to truly be present. I'm not going to let it take over, he said, his voice steady but filled with resolve. I won't. I can't keep living in two worlds, but I also don't want to be the man who abandons everything he's worked for. Ava's gaze softened, and she reached out to squeeze his hand. You don't have to abandon it all, Lucas, but you have to find a balance, and you have to show up, really show up, when it matters most. I will, he promised, squeezing her hand in return. I'll show up. For you. For Lily. The morning was quiet, the kind of stillness that made it feel like the world was holding its breath. Lucas stood at the edge of the balcony, looking out at the sprawling skyline of Chicago. The city had always been his, a place he had shaped with his own hands. But today, it felt distant, almost insignificant in comparison to what was unfolding in his life. His thoughts drifted between the past, the present, and the future, each one tangled with questions he had never allowed himself to ask before. Behind him, the soft murmur of Ava's voice drifted from the living room. It had become a comforting sound, a reminder that he was no longer alone in this world. The same could be said for Lily's laughter. The sound of it filled his mind even when she wasn't nearby, a joyful melody that tugged at his heartstrings. They were sitting at the breakfast table, the three of them, when the phone call had come. The call that would change everything. Mitchell Group had finally made its decision. They wanted to move forward with the deal. Lucas could feel the weight of it hanging in the air, the deal that had consumed him for so long. But this time, the words felt different. This time it wasn't just about profits and quarterly projections. It was about something bigger, about the life he was trying to build, the family he was learning to be a part of. He took a deep breath, stepping back from the railing and walking toward the kitchen. Ava and Lily looked up when he entered, both of them waiting. It wasn't something they had discussed, not in so many words, but Lucas could see it in their eyes. They knew what the decision meant. They knew how hard it had been for him to choose between his world of wealth and the family he wanted to build. "You got the call, didn't you?" Ava asked, her voice gentle, but the question was still there, hanging between them. Lucas nodded, his hands in his pockets as he stood across from them. "I did." Lily, who had been absent-mindedly stirring her cereal, looked up at him, her bright eyes full of expectation. "Are you going to do it, Daddy?" she asked. "Are you going to help them?" Ava smiled softly, but there was a tightness in her expression, a subtle hint of nervousness that Lucas knew wasn't just about the question. She had been patient with him, waiting for him to make his choice. But now that the moment was here, the weight of it was settling between them all. Lucas swallowed hard, his chest tightening as he looked between them. The words felt heavier now, but they were more certain. He had spent so long trying to control his world, trying to balance everything, his wealth, his work, his relationships. But now he understood that balance wasn't about controlling it all. It was about making choices. And those choices, more than anything else, defined the man he wanted to become. "I've decided," Lucas said, his voice steady but full of resolve. "I'm not going to sign the deal." Ava's eyebrows shot up, and for a moment, there was complete silence. Lily too looked up at him, her eyes wide, unsure if she had heard correctly. "You're not?" Ava asked, her voice barely above a whisper. There was a mix of surprise, confusion, and something else, relief perhaps, or a deeper understanding of what this meant. Lucas took a step closer to her, his hand gently resting on her shoulder. "I'm not," he repeated, his voice firm. "I've spent so much of my life building this empire, chasing after something I thought I needed. But now I know that what I need is right here. With you. With Lily." Ava's eyes softened, and for the first time in weeks, she let out a slow, relieved breath. "You're sure?" "I've never been more sure of anything in my life," Lucas said, his heart swelling with the realization of what he was choosing. "It's not just about the money or the power. It's about the people who matter. It's about you two." Lily's small voice broke the moment of silence. "So, you're going to stay here with us?" she asked, her face lighting up with hope. Lucas crouched down to her level, taking both of her hands in his. "I'm not going anywhere, Lily," he said softly. "I'm here. For you. For Ava. I'm staying." Tears filled Ava's eyes as she watched them, and Lucas felt his own heart swell with emotion. This was the moment he had been afraid of, the moment when everything he had built could have slipped away. But now, he knew he had made the right choice. He wasn't losing anything by staying. He was gaining everything. Later that afternoon, Lucas found himself sitting on the couch in Ava's living room, Lily snuggled up beside him, a book open in her lap. The quiet hum of the city outside felt like a distant memory, a background noise to the new life he was building. Ava had stepped out for a moment to make a call, and for the first time in ages, Lucas was able to sit back and simply be. His phone buzzed on the coffee table, and when he looked down, he saw a message from Samuel. He hesitated for a moment, then picked it up. "Congratulations on your decision, Lucas. It's the right one. You won't regret it." Lucas smiled, a weight lifting from his chest as he read the message. There was no turning back now, and for the first time he felt at peace. He wasn't the man he had once been. He wasn't just the CEO, the billionaire. He was a father. He was a partner. He was someone who had learned that the things that truly mattered couldn't be measured in dollars or success. They were measured in love, in presence, in showing up. As Ava walked back into the room, she smiled at the sight of him sitting with Lily, the two of them lost in their own world. And in that moment, Lucas realized something. He wasn't just showing up for them. They were showing up for him too. And for the first time in years, Lucas Grant felt like he was finally home.